I'm Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today we discuss the phone call between Putin and Trump yesterday afternoon. After an hour-long conversation between the two presidents, Kyiv headed to the shelters for another massive drone and missile attack and a long, sleepless night. This morning, Russia declared that it was not possible to achieve their goals through diplomatic means. We also talk to Jade McGlynn about the occupied territories, and we hear from a British band who chose to perform in Kyiv.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Friday, the 4th of July, 3 years and 131 days since the full-scale invasion began. Today, I'm joined by Associate Defense Editor Dom Nicholls. As always, let's start with the military updates.
Last night, there was another massive drone and missile attack on Kyiv and elsewhere across Ukraine. Russian forces launched more than 550 aerial weapons, including over 330 Shahed drones and multiple types of missiles, including ballistic missiles. President Zelensky was speaking this morning. Kyiv was the main target. Ukraine's military said it shot down 270 of the aerial threats, with another 208 drones brought down by electronic warfare. Interceptor drones are said to have brought down dozens more, President Zelensky said, calling their growing use, as in the interceptor drones, a key defence priority. More on those types of things later. He said Russia is not going to, quote, change its dumb, destructive behaviour. The Polish embassy was damaged during the attack on Kyiv, Poland's foreign minister said this morning. Sikorski, speaking on X, said in a massive attack on Kyiv, the building of our embassy's consular section was damaged. I just spoke with Ambassador Ukashevitz. Everyone is safe and sound. Ukraine urgently needs air defence resources. There were strikes elsewhere in Kyiv Oblast and also across Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, Kharkiv, Chernihiv Oblast as well. Fires and damage reported in nearly every district of the capital, including residential buildings, schools, medical facilities and critical infrastructure such as railways. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said 23 people have been injured, although that number has been ticking up all morning. I think it's probably gone up by now. And Timur Tkachenko, who's the head of the Kyiv City Military Administration, warned residents to close their windows due to dangerous levels of what he said was combustion products in the air. Writing on Telegram, he said, Russia, a terrorist country, has wreaked havoc. The Russians bring nothing but terror and murder. That is a fact. Now, the attacks on Kyiv and across the rest of the country started at pretty much the same time as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin were talking in what we're told was a 2-hour phone call. President Zelensky said that as the US and Russian leaders were talking yesterday, air raid sirens were sounding across Ukraine. Andrei Sybiha, Ukraine's foreign minister, said, absolutely horrible and sleepless night in Kyiv, one of the worst so far. Hundreds of Russian drones and ballistic missiles rained down on the Ukrainian capital right after Putin spoke with President Trump. Now, commenting on the phone call, Russian presidential aide Yuri Yushakov said Trump had raised the issue of negotiations and that Putin had said Russia still seeks negotiations to end the war. He said Putin and Trump were, quote, on the same page, but Trump disagreed with that reading of it. He said, I didn't make any progress with him at all. Speaking to reporters, Donald Trump said, I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin because I don't think he's there. I'm just saying I don't think he's looking to stop. And that's too bad. OK. Now, here in the UK, the Prime Minister's spokesman said continued Russian strikes are clear evidence that Putin is not serious about peace. Some US Republicans have come out and urged Donald Trump to increase the pressure on Putin. Don Bacon, the congressman for Nebraska's 2nd District, said Putin had mocked the US president and America by launching another record attack on Kyiv overnight, just as the two were speaking. Mr. Bacon said, Mr. President, your policy towards Russia is not working. While we negotiate, Putin bombs Ukrainian cities. It is time to change strategy. We and our allies must arm Ukraine to the teeth, and we need the toughest sanctions. Putin is mocking you and America. I mean, Russia didn't even wait a day after the phone call or make some daft claim about having to respond to Ukrainian terrorism. So as Donald Trump and Putin were speaking, Russia was either preparing to strike or had missiles and drones in the air. They must be literally laughing at the United States. As I said, they didn't even wait a day after the phone call before launching one of the biggest strikes of the war. How can they make it any clearer that they believe they can play the US? Now, I know a lot of our US listeners support Donald Trump and dislike Ukraine. That's fine. That's democracy. You have your opinion. No problem at all. A lot of people see support for Ukraine as a waste of time. They see the country as a corrupt little problem for Europe to sort out. But in all seriousness, I ask you now, that wing of US society, what for you is worse, supporting Ukraine or having people laugh at you on the world stage? Because I think it really is time to, perhaps reluctantly, hold your nose and decide one way or the other. Anyway, hitting back, Ukrainian drones struck multiple targets last night in Russia, including a defence facility in the southern Rostov region. This comes from Andrei Kovalenko, head of the Counter-Disinformation Centre at Ukraine's National Security and Defence Council. Mr. Kovalenko said a drone had hit the Azov optical and mechanical plant in the town of Azov in Rostov Oblast. That's a facility that reportedly manufactures critical components for the Russian armed forces. He said, despite the difficult night, there is also good news. There were attacks on facilities in Russia, particularly in Moscow and Rostov regions. This is where the eyes for Russian armoured vehicles are assembled. Now, Russian officials confirmed a number of drone strikes across several regions of Russia. The Defence Ministry in Moscow later claimed that their air defence units had intercepted or destroyed 48 Ukrainian drones overnight. According to Russia's MOD, 26 drones were downed over Rostov, that's to the east, 12 over Kursk Oblast, 6 over Belgorod, 3 over Oryol, and 1 over Lipetsk. They're all to the north of Ukraine. Now, a lot of that reporting came from the Kyiv Independent, who, as they say, and as we concur, can't verify all the claims. Ukrainian authorities not commented on those strikes inside Russia. OK, moving on. As we were coming off air yesterday, you'll remember there were reports coming in of a suspected assassination in occupied Luhansk Oblast. Well, today, Russian state-affiliated media outlet TASS have reported that the former occupation mayor of Luhansk City, Manolis Pelavov, died in an explosion in occupied Luhansk City. Ukrainian outlet Suspilna said sources had told them that the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, killed Pilavov by detonating an explosive device. He was the mayor of occupied Luhansk from 2014 to just a couple of years ago, 2023. Now, linked to that, an odd story I've not seen elsewhere, but it's reported by the Institute for the Study of War, US-based think tank. Telegram channel Nexta said yesterday that there are unconfirmed reports that Alexei Komkov, who's the head of the FSB's 5th Directorate, that directorate that's officially tasked with overseeing operational work and international relations, died after a car exploded in central Moscow. Now, ISW said they can't confirm the death of Mr. Komkov or who may have been responsible for the reported car explosion in Moscow City, but it does have all the hallmarks of recent events that we've seen that end up being claimed by the SBU. And just coming towards the end, fallout continues from that announcement a couple of days ago of the US suspension of military aid to Ukraine. As we reported yesterday, the Pentagon correspondent for NPR, National Public Radio, had a list of military equipment said to be stuck in Poland as a result of the US decision. The Economist said yesterday that the Pentagon had turned around planes carrying air defence interceptors and other US military aid that were on their way to Ukraine on June the 30th and July the 1st. Now then, the US State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said yesterday that Trump had indicated his remaining commitment to US provisions of Patriot interceptors to Ukraine, adding that the United States hasn't paused sending weapons to Ukraine, but that the recent suspension is, quote, one aspect, one situation, one event that has been changed. Quite what the hell that means, I've absolutely no idea. But whatever it means, it contradicts seemingly the words from Wednesday of Chief Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell, who said that the weapons shipments to Ukraine had been paused while the Department of Defense conducted a capability review. Then, if things weren't confusing enough, Adding to the melange of words, Donald Trump, asked by a reporter yesterday, why did you pause weapons shipments to Ukraine, replied, we haven't. We're giving weapons. He said the US is trying to help, and he claimed that Joe Biden depleted the US's weapons stocks with military aid to Kyiv and that Washington must defend its own interests. He said, but we've given so many weapons, but we are giving weapons, and we're working with Ukraine, we're trying to help them. But we haven't. Biden emptied out our whole country, giving them weapons, and we have to make sure that we have enough for ourselves. Anyway, the proof of the pudding is on the ground and the weapons aren't moving in. I'm told that some were within an hour of, as in they were close enough in Poland, within an hour by road, it could have been over the border and into Ukraine when they were stopped. So no matter whatever the word salad is, the weapons have been paused. Now on the ground, it won't come as a surprise to you to say there was next to no movement at all. And just finally, on military aid, a few quick headlines. President Zelensky was in Denmark yesterday, where he signed a memorandum on a new long-term strategic partnership with US company Swiftbeat, agreeing to produce hundreds of thousands of interceptor drones this year that are capable. These are the things that shoot down Russian Shahed drones, particularly the Shaheds, but anything else. Shaheds are relatively slow and predictable in their flight path. So they're the ones that the interceptor drones are very good at hunting, with expansion of this line increasing next year. Now, interceptor drones, you'll remember, they were the ones that I mentioned earlier, cited by President Zelensky just this morning as one of the critical areas needed by Ukraine right now. Now, that deal links to another joint venture announced recently between British defence firm Prevail Partners and a Ukrainian drone manufacturer Skyton International. They're going to increase production of long-range drones. And then finally, unnamed German security officials, speaking to German media outlet Die Welt, said Germany had signed a contract to finance the production of over 500 AN-196, the Antonov 196, or Lyti long-range drones for Ukraine. And also, we mentioned yesterday Sweden's 1.5 billion krona, so about 160 million US dollars worth of military aid package. That was mainly Archer, artillery barrels and a few other bits and pieces. Add to that, earlier this week, Latvia said it was going to be sending 42 Patriot armoured personnel carriers. So, better news on the drone and general military support fronts, but air defence is the overwhelmingly critical area right now, as evidenced by last night's attacks, and that area seems to be still held up by the US. And that's us up to date, Adélie.
Thank you, Dom. I'm going to do the diplomatic updates. You've covered the phone call between Putin and Trump a little bit, but I'm going to go into more detail as this is obviously the top headline for the day. So they talked on the phone yesterday for about an hour. It's the 6th phone call since the US president took office in January. As you said, the main briefing from it was from Yuri Ushakov, the Kremlin's top foreign policy aide, who gave a briefing to Russian state news. This is what we know, what everybody has been quoting, saying that the conversation between the presidents, as always, was on the same wavelength, was frank, businesslike and specific. Make of that what you will. Putin's stance remains unyielding. He said that they would continue to push to achieve their war aims as long as the root causes of the conflict were not addressed. And Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, declared in his press briefing this morning that it was not possible at this stage for Russia to achieve its aims through diplomatic means. Although, he said, they preferred diplomatic means, they would continue the special operation, aka the invasion of Ukraine, as long as diplomacy did not seem to be an option. So I'm not really sure what's been going on for the last 6 months with all the different peace talks and gatherings in Istanbul and all the different phone calls. He also added that a meeting between Trump and Putin may be necessary in the future, but needed to be carefully planned. So we'll have to follow up on that. As Dom, you said, once the call ended, Trump was not happy and expressed his frustration with Putin, which has been mounting in recent week, that he didn't make any progress with him at all. The pausing of the weapons delivery that we've covered many, many times this week on the podcast and that Dom just discussed was apparently not discussed at all during the call. There were many other topics discussed about the presidents, but there are two that I think are worth flagging that were reported by the New York Times. One is that during the call, the two presidents confirmed their mutual interest in realizing a number of economic projects between Russia and the United States, including in the energy sector and space exploration. That's one. And the second one is that before his discussion with Trump, Putin talked with Russian business executives in order to articulate a desire to cooperate with the United States on film production to promote, quote, traditional values close to us in the Trump administration. And apparently the US president liked the idea the Kremlin said. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up these 2 points is because I think it's worth thinking about in terms of all the conversation around sanctions. Like, what are sanctions doing, and how is Russia being isolated on the world stage? What is economic and diplomatic pressure on Russia if at the same time there are conversations around economic projects, around energy sector, space exploration, and also in terms of culture and soft power? Because I think it really talks to how blurred the lines have become between different values and different systems. And I do wonder whether the worldviews of these two leaders that seem to align to some extent domestically and internationally, what worlds are they building for us? And I think that ambivalence in terms of Trump's position on Ukraine, pausing the weapons on one hand, trying to make peace talk happen, but what kind of peace are we talking about and what world are we talking about down the line? And what are all these sanctions and what is all this pressure for? Anyways, the massive drone and missile attack on Kyiv started very shortly after the end of the call. Ariane Chemin, Le Monde special envoy to Kyiv, wrote a moving dispatch from one of the underground stations in Kyiv, where she also spent the night, alongside civilians who have sheltered for almost 10 nights in the last month. She reported that on the usual Telegram channels where civilians follow the attacks, the cynical but also humorous comments of Ukrainians flooded throughout the night. I'll give you a bit of a taste that she reports in her piece. America puts Kyiv in a mess. Dude, please stop attack on Kyiv now. And people wondering about how much of a tradition it's become whenever Putin has a phone call with a European or Western leader for Kyiv to be hit by massive attacks. One person commented, how much time between Putin and Trump's phone call and the attack tonight? Maybe an hour? So that's what the mood seems to be like in Kyiv following yesterday's news. Upcoming this afternoon is a phone call between Trump and Zelensky, which is expected to discuss the pausing on the weapons delivery. So we'll have more on that on Monday. Dom, you've covered a little bit some of the US reactions to the phone call. I was going to mention Don Bacon, the Republican representative for Nebraska and former general of the US Air Force, saying, Mr. President, your policy towards Russia is not working. While we need to negotiate, Putin bombs Ukrainian cities. Here is Kyiv today. It's time to change strategy. We must arm Ukraine to the teeth and we need the toughest sanctions. Putin is mocking you and America. And then Joe Wilson from South Carolina. As Americans begin to enjoy the sound of fireworks in celebration of our nation's independence, war criminal Putin, who is losing his pathetic war, resorts to scorched earth tactics across Ukrainian cities that predate Moscow's existence. With rapid stock assessment, I am confident the Department of Defense will advance President Trump's objective stated at The Hague to send additional air defense and approved weapons to help stop this absolute depravity, as allies have and must continue doing at rapid pace. Armed with cheap Iranian and North Korean weapons, Putin delights in firebombing sleeping families and will continue his imperialist perversions until he is stopped. So that's the reactions on the US side of things. One of these reactions in the EU has been from Radoslav Sikorski, the foreign affairs minister in Poland, who wrote on X, President Trump, Putin is mocking your peace efforts. Please restore supplies of anti-aircraft ammunition to Ukraine and impose tough new sanctions on the aggressor. A couple of other headlines. The South China Morning Post reports that China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi reportedly told Kaja Kallas on July 3rd, yesterday, that the country cannot afford for Russia to lose the war in Ukraine. There are fears that the US would shift their focus towards Beijing, as Beijing is mounting preparation to launch a possible invasion into Taiwan. So that I thought was worth flagging. And then this morning, there have been exchanges of prisoners of war between Russia and Ukraine. A new group of Russian soldiers returned from territory controlled by the Kyiv regime. There haven't been any numbers from either side, as is often the case, but there have been photos of Russian soldiers, and these exchange of wounded prisoners and the return of killed fighters remains one of the only tangible results of the negotiations held in Istanbul in the last couple of months. And now over to Francis and Dr Jade McGlynn of King's College, London.
Well, Jade, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. And where would you like to start in terms of updates on resistance in the occupied territories?
Hello, always lovely to be here. I'll start, I think, by just providing a broad overview of some of the more interesting elements in the resistance over the last couple of weeks. So there were at least 14 confirmed operations, most of them in Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, which is especially noteworthy just because of how brutal the occupation regime is there. A key trend during this period was the focus on transportation, communication disruption. So, for example, on 30th of June, resistance damaged and destroyed vehicles used by Russian forces in southern Ukraine. And then on the 1st of July, they targeted a railway relay cabinet in Novobogdanovka, so a small settlement in Zaporizhia Oblast. On the same day, in Sevastopol, there's a group known as the Crimean Partisans, and they set fire to an apartment belonging to a Russian military occupier. So a bit of a mix there, but this continued focus on disrupting transport. Another major tactic was the targeted elimination of high-value individuals. So 24th of June, Anti-Smash reported the death of Russian FSB officer in Henichesk in Kherson region. On the 23rd of June, Atesh reported killing several Russian soldiers and destroying vehicles in Mirne in Skadovsk district. And interestingly, on the anniversary of Prigozhin's march on Moscow, an agent of Atesh, a former fighter of the Wagner PMC, who saw the light and changed sides, carried out an operation in Kherson, during which an army vehicle intended for transfer to the front was set on fire. And the Russian military person guarding the assembly point also died in the attack. So they lost both equipment and an individual deep into the rear where they generally feel safe. As well as that, we see the main thing that the resistance do, which is increased coordination and intelligence sharing with the Ukrainian armed forces. So let's leave it there. Just a quick update for you today, but just to let you know the resistance continues. It continues to be clever and focus on the ways that it can have the most impact, which are inevitably not the ways that always draw the most attention. And therefore, I would like to thank you and the listeners for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jade.
Earlier in the week, Dom mentioned a British band performing a gig in Kyiv. To play us out this week, he spoke to the band about their music and why they thought it was so important to tour Ukraine.
I couldn't stand up to fall into the arms of defeat. Didn't take warning.
Well, I'm delighted now to speak to Johnny Foster and Dave Robbo Robinson for Hardwicke Circus. You are, where are you guys? Where are you and what are you doing?
We're in Kyiv right now. We come from the north of England, a place called Carlisle, and we are touring Ukraine, playing 8 shows, demonstrating our support, our gesture of solidarity towards the Ukrainian people, fundraising for a vehicle to take to the front line and encouraging other bands and other musicians to come to this beautiful country and to support what it needs.
So, Johnny, had you any exposure to Ukraine before? Have you toured there before? Do you know the country? What drew you there?
No, we've never toured here before, but we've always discussed Ukraine. And when we were given this opportunity to come and tour here, we thought we'd put our money where our mouth is. And so that's why we're here.
And you've kind of rejigged the band a bit, I think, from your dates through Europe and the Czech Republic and Poland and what have you. But you've got a different lineup inside Ukraine, including a Ukrainian sax player, I understand.
That's right. So before we came here, we were touring in the Czech Republic. We had 16 gigs there. And as we were driving across the Czech Republic and through Poland, a couple of our band members went back to the UK, and me and Dave were left sat in the front of the van, making over 100 calls, trying to reform the group for the Hardwicke Circus Ukraine branch as we were coming over here for these fundraising gigs. So we've got Roman Korchevsky on the saxophone, and he's from Kyiv. We've got Conor Morrissey from Australia, who's on the piano. And we have Ben Wild from the heart of Cumbria, joining us on the bass guitar. And Joe Kinkarasco from Texas. So this is a group of musicians that have never played together before. Some of the guys have never been on tour before. But we've all wanted to get together. First gig in Lviv, we played the songs for the first time, a group of musicians, all strangers to one another, and we've since done 7 shows and formed this unique bond as musicians, but also to the Ukrainian people and the different communities we've been involved in, and it's been an extraordinary experience.
So where have you been through the country, and what's the reception been?
So we've played in Lviv, Vinnytsia, Ternopil, Kyiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, right at the front line. And most recently, we played at a rehabilitation centre for guys that had been serving on the very front line for 10 years. And what's fascinating to us is our whole idea of it is we're a band, we're musicians, but we're balancing that against an ethos, an idea of what we think of the world, and putting our art into a kind of meaningful area. And in the UK, over the years, we've toured in prisons. We've done a prison tour, 15 jails, and what we saw there was our lyrics that we would write up in Cumbria. They resonate entirely differently according to people's circumstance. And the same thing has happened here, right on the front line. And it's been, the most rewarding thing we've ever done. And to have these soldiers who have been right in the heart of it for such a long period, they said to us, for a moment, we had some respite. We could live in the music for a minute. That was incredibly rewarding. And that's exactly why we're here.
So you mentioned the ethos there. So music is a very social thing. What is the ethos of the band, and why do you think it's resonated so much in Ukraine?
Well, it is very social, and I think it's very easy. In the UK, there isn't really a kind of a music industry, so to speak. There's bands and there's record labels with a lack of ideas. It's all entertainment industry. They don't believe in anything. And music has a social conscience. It can have an incredibly positive power on the world and in communities, both locally and further afield. And you realize, although we're coming from the north of England and we're at the most eastern point of Ukraine, there's a huge similarity between people. And this is a war that is essentially, they're trying to take over a culture of people. And we have recognized the similarities there, and that music shouldn't have a border, and that this is our way of encouraging other people to take a punt and to see that you can actually have a positive effect on people's lives.
Cheers, Johnny. Now, Dave Robinson, you're I don't know, it'd probably be very insulting if I called you a national treasure in the music industry, so I won't do that. But you've been around for a very long time. That's probably also very insulting, so I apologise for that. I'll just get on with it, because I'm just writing myself off your Christmas card list. But you were tour manager for Hendrix back on his last tour, I believe. You co-founded Stiff Records, so you signed the likes of Nick Lowe, Jury, Madness, Pogues, Kirsty MacColl. We're going through my formative musical years here. John has just said there that music today in Britain is just entertainment, that the industry doesn't believe in anything. How far do you agree with that? And I note that on Glastonbury weekend, you're in Ukraine. You're in a war zone. You're not in a field in Somerset. Does that speak to what John is talking about?
Well, I've always thought myself that music had places to go and people to reach. That wasn't always the entertainment business that mainly people see it as. People wonder why the band are here. The band are a very interesting group of people that I've met a few years ago in Carlisle, the top of England, where if you weren't in London, you weren't happening at all. And the music that they were playing was very much what Stiff believed in. So suddenly I had a kind of a Stiff band in the latter years of my career, and they've come through remarkably. What Johnny says about the lyrical content of songs meaning something entirely different if you put it in a different situation. One of their songs is called Let's Make New Mistakes, and a very big item in jails in England, but equally here in Ukraine. I'm astonished by the attitude of the local people who seem to have adapted around a war situation. It must be close to what the Blitz was like. So we're all experiencing something brand new that we've never seen before. And I think artists, songwriters that I've mainly signed, most of the people I signed were songwriters. Some of them weren't oil paintings, and they weren't there for the entertainment value, but the value of the songwriting and the content of the lyrics and the attitude to world peace or otherwise has always struck me as something that musicians have uniquely.
So do you think we're going to see a ripple of the music and the energy and the dynamism, the art that came out of the Cold War and the fear of nuclear annihilation. And I'm thinking of some of the most powerful songs that came out of the 80s.
That's what our ambition is in coming here to Ukraine. It is that we should be able to ripple our way through what is now called the industry and to try and get people to pay attention to what otherwise than just to be giving out the right kind of information, so to speak. I mean, we found that a couple of the promoters said that when we announced Hardwicke Circus as coming to our venues, remarkably, we got calls from Japan, Germany, Poland, and various other places around the world. This is their telling us. It's saying, we'd like to come. If somebody is coming, we would like to come. So it seems to have opened a door, and I wonder how much of a door we can open. You obviously, with your situation, are able to publicize more than most. And a lot of people obviously paying attention to what your blog is saying is an opportunity for us to put across this story.
Do you think there's room there for an album, Kyiv Calling or Ukraine Calling or something like that?
I think it would be fantastic, and it's what musicians should do. Certain kind of artists should be pushing the boundaries of what is possible world news generally. I mean, we all feel strongly about Russian bully Ukraine dramatically, and we're against that in principle. But as Johnny says, put our money where our mouth is. Well, we've put our situation on the line, and we've been here. Lots of musicians that we appealed to in terms of maybe joining this Ukraine band that Johnny's mentioned found that they would love to come, but they were playing Glastonbury for us, or that was a good excuse, or they thought we were just crackers and they couldn't understand why this would be something that we would contemplate.
But our position is we can't understand why you wouldn't go and do it. It's one thing, you mentioned Glastonbury, it's one thing waving a flag in the air, and it's another thing actually going to the heart of the matter and facing it head on and seeing what is required for Ukraine to win the war and for a culture to survive. And off the back of this tour, we're recording the shows for a live record with all proceeds going to their war effort with a view to working in accordance with Mission Aid for Ukraine and Agent Simpson to getting a vehicle to the front line with all the necessary medical supplies. So this is something that lots of other bands can do. And the whole point is it's not about us, it's about Ukraine. And it's about saying if you are able to do something, no matter how big or small, every penny counts.
There is a performative element to some of the flag waving, as you say. And do you think there, from people you speak to in the UK and throughout Europe as you're touring, is there a greater willingness or slightly a greater understanding of why it's important to take our music and our art into Ukraine and vice versa?
I think it's lip service by and large. Everybody cares. Oh yeah, Ukraine, that's terrible. Oh wow, but as Johnny says, not a lot of people, particularly musicians, because they're in a unique position perhaps at the songwriting and also the fact that touring, you can stretch out to places that other people can't reach. It has been fantastic in terms of crowd recognition of the group. They have really, a very young, incredibly enthusiastic crowd have turned up at the venues, and I think there is more to be done. That's what the music started out to be, and unfortunately, from my point of view, from Stiff Records' kind of attitude, has diffused over the years into something a bit mindless in my mind, where computer programming and other elements of industry music is being pushed around. And you'd have to have been here yourself to see the very remarkable effect. They seem to be without a lot of music. A lot of the bands here, I mean, there's nothing wrong with them, but a lot of black T-shirts are sold in this country. I think the Hardwickes have opened up the sunny side of things a bit, and that has really had an effect.
And a lot of the popular music is heavy metal, and we're playing indie rock singer-songwriter music from the UK, but it's translated incredibly well. And the irony is the only opposition we've kind of had to the idea has been from the art scene in the UK. The kind of heavily kind of cocaine-fueled Camden group of musicians where there's a lot of artists, but there's not a lot of art. And we are the antidote to that. And that's our vision of things. And when we've been here, the people who actually have come to the gigs and who have brothers or mothers or sisters or family members involved on the front line, it's only their response that actually matters. And it's been the most incredible experience meeting people and hearing from them that actually, for a moment, they almost forgot what they were going through. And that's the importance of art, and that's its real purpose.
Well, Johnny, it sounds like you're riding the wave of, I don't know, new punk. You know, if punk was a rejection of the orthodoxy and establishment, then that sounds like what you're trying to do against the established orthodoxy of sludgy, middle-of-the-road British anarchic music, which is so middle of the road, it's going to get knocked over kind of thing. So even though your music might not necessarily be on the sort of heavier end of the spectrum, you might be the new punks. Robbo, are you seeing the ripple of time here? Have you discovered the new punks?
Well, maybe so. We're from Cumbria, so we're all kind of border reavers. So the kind of punk kind of thing runs right through us, I suppose.
Brilliant. Now, this isn't going to be your last visit to the country, I understand, because you're fundraising to take a vehicle back there in the new year. Is that right?
That's right. We're going to come back here and we're going to do it all again. Bigger, raise more money, straight to the front line. And also the band Occasia from Kyiv, who we've done the whole tour with. We'd like to get them over to the UK. And for this whole thing to be a continuation. So it's in Ukraine, but when we're in the UK, this whole mission of ours will continue, and we'll be hoping to open as many doors as we can to raise as much money as is needed.
Yeah, and I can't overstate, Dom, how this British, Tex, Aussie, Ukrainian indie rock gets people moving. The Telegraph carried an article on Ben Burgess, was killed a week last Saturday, and his brother and the two guys I know and support, two Jameses, came and they dedicated a song. The guys very nicely, the Ben, very quietly, understated. But by the end of the evening, they were dancing, and James, who's fought for 3 years, and he just lost his best buddy, after me, tears in his eyes, said it's the happiest I've been for a long time.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
They get the whole place going, yeah.
Yeah. I remember our somewhat Mickey Mouse squadron band that I took around Bosnia a while ago, massacring House of the Rising Sun in cities coming to you. But no, the power of music is extraordinary, and especially in a situation such as armed conflict.
As an outsider, if I had to describe the band's performances, it's making people smile. Afterwards, everyone is just smiling. They're glowing. You know, I can't overstate it that they're all just walking around glowing. I mean, I keep getting reflected glory with the odd photo, which I'm happy with, yeah.
Brilliant. No, I made a career out of reflected glory. Nothing wrong with that. And just finally, so what's your message to Ukrainians listening to this who may well have been at some of your gigs, and also your message to people around the world about how important art is and what we should be thinking about in terms of supporting Ukraine through the arts?
Our message is that when you watch the news in the UK, you have a very narrow view of what's going on. You see all the terrible destruction, and of course that must be highlighted. But it's about people. This is about people, this is about culture, and about saying to Ukraine that regardless of the actions of the US or the inefficiencies of Europe, people in the UK are behind you, the art is behind you, and to UK people to say it's one thing being on your sofa talking about it, and it's another thing being active in your support. Passive support isn't required, and get in touch because we want to try and involve as many people as we possibly can.
Well, brilliant. I wish you all the best. Love to meet up when you get back over here, and then love to see you again in country, back in Ukraine. When you next go back out there, we'll come out with you. It'd be great to call something from the event.
No, we'd love to have you. There's a bunk in the bus for you, Dom.
Brilliant. Thank you. Lovely.
Dom, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, thanks, Adélie. I know it's the end of the week. We normally try and finish with something slightly different or a bit more upbeat, but, hey, we don't always have to do that. And I don't think it's appropriate today. I think this week has been tougher than most recently. Not in a great place diplomatically. Militarily, fine. We've got to really think about this war, about what a war is. So on the ground, I mean, the lines aren't shifting in it. They're really not shifting. All of Russia's effort, 99% is in the Donbass, and they're making a few hundred metres a day. But the lines aren't shifting, but the war is bigger than that. We need to have a look at where we are. And this decision by the US is not good at all. And Russia's ability to mount these very large aerial attacks, 500 plus aerial devices, which used to be kind of one a month, then one a week, and now the tempo is increasing. So it's not great at the moment. So we need to have a little think about where we are. Anyone seen the coalition of the willing? No, neither have I. So there's few ideas here. So this steel porcupine approach that we saw, that has been talked about, this idea of arm Ukraine to the teeth like a steel porcupine and then Russia won't come anywhere near it. That is no longer credible. That was based on the idea of the war slowing down, of there being a ceasefire, of the porcupine being able to sit still and point its spikes at the enemy. It was a deterrence model and a mechanism that was based on America being there as a backstop, if you want to use that word, but, Trump having success in negotiations. So the steel porcupine thing is a non-starter. Europe seems to have woken up to the threat from Russia, but is acting in a way that, if I was being ungenerous, and I'm in that kind of mood, could be interpreted as saying that they're happy to support Ukraine with money and military aid and what have you, as a way of playing for time to allow Europe to rearm. So basically, Europe has no strategic autonomy here. It's supporting Ukraine as a means of survival. And if that's correct, that ain't good at all. Now, the Brits, where are we? There's a lot of people saying, you need to separate from the US, blah, 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 lead Europe, all that kind of jazz. The UK national policy is to stay very close to the US. We call it a special relationship. The US don't know what we're talking about. Not many other people do either. I'm increasingly sure we don't really know what we're talking about. But our policy, our national policy since the Second World War has been to stick close to the US. We are not going to break with the US. We are not going to go against Donald Trump. We're not going to say, you've given up on Ukraine. We're giving up on you. That is not going to happen. The Brits are not going to walk away. But they don't have to. You can do both. You can stick close to the US and then also provide some kind of leadership in Europe and NATO. But I think where we are now, the baseline strategic position for Ukraine right now needs to be, number one, the US has disengaged. Donald Trump is not interested in Ukraine. He's been humiliated by being called out, basically, by Putin. So he's not going to show any more interest because it just highlights yet again that he's not been able to get a deal. So the US has disengaged. Trump has this deep-seated, deep-rooted hatred of Zelensky over the whole Hunter Biden thing. So he's not going to go against all that. He is a creature of habit. The US has disengaged. But secondly, I think Ukraine needs to establish a joint strategy with Europe. Not the EU, but Europe, Brits as well. And I'm not talking coordination, I'm not talking cooperation, I'm talking a genuine joint strategy across military, financial, industrial, political, all the levers of power. And I think Europe needs to look at Ukraine as part of the fight, not fending off the fight. Yeah, so I don't think we're in a great place at the moment, but I think this week has, if you were going to ask me, is the US a reliable ally? That's a very tricky question because on the one hand, no, they're not because they've done all this stuff with the weapons and what have you. But also, secondly, they might be because to be reliable, you need to know how someone's going to react and they're going to do what they said and they're going to act the way that they always have done so that you can plan accordingly. Well, in that way, they are reliable. The US has shown, Trump has shown, he's not interested in supporting Ukraine. He's disengaging. So they are reliable in that front. You can make a plan for that. You can make a plan on that basis. And I think the plan is a genuine joint strategy with Europe. And Europe needs to lean into it, not just say, thanks, Ukraine, for fending them off while we try and get our house in order. So, sorry, a bit of a ramble. But, end of another tough week. And we're the lucky ones. We get to sit here and gob off about it, not have to sit and endure it every night. But I don't think we're in a great place at the moment, folks, but we need to have a conversation about how we conceptually leap forward, throw our vision forward and say, OK, US, we'll come back to you in a few years. If you want to, we'll still be here. We'll come back. But right now, I think we just need to take a little step away and look closer to home for support to Ukraine.
Dom, I have a question for you as a final thought. President Macron is coming to the UK next week. We'll be looking at that, and I know they'll be talking about coalition of the willing. Do you have any expectations of the conversations between Keir Starmer and Macron coming up?
Blimey. Well, I think we need to stop talking about the coalition of the willing. It's just a nice buzzword. It doesn't do anything. I mean, look, UK and France, two massive powers, world-leading economies, two P5 nations, nuclear states. They've got a heft in this. They can do it if they want. I've said before, General Sir Richard Barrons makes the point that the European NATO nations alone have a combined GDP 17 times the size of Russia. If this is industrial, if this is a war of attrition, then Europe can do it alone. Europe can support Ukraine alone. And Britain and France are big drivers in there. I mean, others are increasingly so. Look at the weapons buy, the way that Poland is ramping up. But yeah, I mean, they could do. I'm going to be exceptionally disappointed next week if, well, two things. Firstly, if you don't get an interview with Macron, by God,
Okay, high stakes.
But also, if they just come out with platitudes again, and there's not some, maybe not in public, but if we get the whispers behind closed doors, then I think we're in a very, very difficult place. And that really will, if on my metric that I've just scribbled there, that the Ukrainian government should decide the US is disengaged. If Britain and France don't come out with something really meaningful next week, then I think they might think, well, I'll tell you what, we'll come back in a year's time and see where you fellas are as well. Yeah, I'm a bit glass half empty today.
Very much glass empty, and leaving me with quite a big task for next week. I'll do my best to put a question to Macron at the press conference.
Fromage frais, Adélie, fromage frais.
Well, that's it for us folks today. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and in those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest newsletter. Each week, Dom Nicholls and Francis Dearnley answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights. Plus, maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the description to this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app, and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each day on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells, and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.